An email arrived in my inbox this week with the subject line, "What would love do?" At first glance, I read it as, "What do you love?" As I reread it, my thoughts moved from, "What do you love?" to, "What would you do for love?" to seeing the question, "What would love do?" What do you love focuses on me and my desires, hopes, and dreams. What would you do for love moves my focus away from my internal world to my actions based on my values about love. And what would love do takes the action further away from me personally, as it focuses on the purity of some ideal of love. It attunes my attention to acts that reflect love, things that I see around me that I think, oh, that's love. Which leads me back to the first question, what do you love? Because I believe that love is the purest reflection and purpose of God, this repeating cycle of questions, what do you love? What would you do for love? What would love do? And back again, is an act of faith and discipleship. In today's reading from Matthew, Jesus is confronted by a woman who is unlike him. She is from another culture and country. Her skin is a different color than his. She speaks to Jesus with a discernible accent. And she dares to violate the norms of his culture, which dictated that a woman never speaks directly to a man outside of her family group. And yet she doesn't ask for anything different than so many others who came to him. She asks for healing for her child. She pleads with him as only a desperate parent can beg for the life of their precious child. Jesus ignores the woman's first request, like she's invisible, much the way we might not notice a homeless person asking for food or money. The woman, who is nameless as a way of dehumanizing her, does not turn away, discouraged or defeated. She persists. She appeals to Jesus with a kind of social logic he can understand. And even as he calls her a dog, he acknowledges her and changes his answer. She is the only person in the Gospels who changes Jesus' mind. Even the Pharisees, who argue with him constantly, don't ever change his mind. But Jesus does listen to her, and he hears her. And perhaps he examines the prejudice in his heart. Perhaps he has an epiphany that he is the steward of all God's promises of unbounded love. He heals the woman's daughter, and he commends her tenacious faith. Faith in the face of seeming impossibility. Faith that believes in the power of love. Faith that empowers, that fills us with courage to stand up to injustice and to call out evil when we see it at work in the world. God did not give us a spirit of fear, but rather a spirit of power and of love and of self-discipline. 2 Timothy 1, verses 6 and 7. Today we observe Indigenous Peoples Day. From its beginning, European-founded society in North America has been rife with the oppression and subjugation of people of color, beginning with the Native people and continuing into our current day. U.S. history is full of disrespect for the people who lived here first. From stealing their land by violence and legal trickery, to killing them with disease, to denying them their native language and desecrating their sacred places without apology. The dehumanization continues today. Native communities are among the hardest hit by COVID-19, and yet that fact remains mostly untold. Blatant disregard for the dignity of human beings is so much a part of the cloth of our culture that we often fail to recognize it for the evil that it is. Which is why we observe Indigenous Peoples Day rather than Columbus Day. We refute the history of European invasion of this country, and we stand with and honor the people who lived on this land first. Here at Trinity, we honor and thank the Duwamish people who tended and loved this land and creatures. Recognizing that our cultural narrative ignores and dehumanizes human beings who are created in God's image, just as we are, can feel mighty uncomfortable. And examining ourselves and our culture for our underlying assumptions is challenging work. Further speaking up to refute those assumptions of superiority and inferiority is scary. Imagine the Canaanite woman's trembling voice as she stands up to Jesus when he has just called her a racial slur. And still she summons courage to speak for the thing she loves the most, her child. God did not give us a spirit of fear, but rather a spirit of power and of love and of self-discipline. We believe in a God who loves us deeply and who trusts us to be good stewards of all that we have. Stewards care for things on behalf of their owner and with the same diligence as the owner. We are stewards of all that God gives us: this earth, our lives, our bodies and health, our relationships, our time and money, even the ministry of love, hope, reconciliation, and forgiveness that we continue as disciples of Jesus. It has been said that stewardship is everything we do with our lives after the very first moment we say, "I believe." Every breath, every decision, every word and action of our lives are statements of our faith. And thank goodness we believe in a God who offers forgiveness and fresh starts for the asking. Because I, for one, forget often, daily, that the life I live belongs to God. Which is to say, it takes courage to live our lives as faithful stewards of God's gifts to us. God's spirit of power and love and self-discipline fills us with courage for facing these days of pandemic, divisive political rhetoric, and civil unrest that is calling out prejudice and systemic injustice. It's easy to turn away, to say these things don't affect me, but they do. They affect every one of us because they affect our hearts and our minds, and most of all, because they affect our human siblings. Which brings me back to the question, what do we love? Well, we love God and many of the things that God gives us. Simple comforts, community, health, rain, and sun and flowers, family, a sense of purpose. I encourage you this week to start or add to a list of the things that you love. Just make a list. Keep writing things on it. And the next question, what would we do for love? A mother endures degradation to plead for the life of her child. Out of love for us, God gifts us with Jesus to show us how to love and share the message of God's forgiveness and love with the world. As stewards of God's love, We join in creating God's vision of a world where all people are treated as God's beloved with equal dignity and value. What would you do for the things you love to ensure that they are healthy, nurtured, and growing into the best life they could have? And the final question is the one that grounds our prayers for one another and for the world. It calls us out of ourselves, reminds us that all that we have is gift from God and we are merely stewards of this life. What would love do?